Listeners should be aware this podcast includes discussions around issues of non-state torture and abuse.
So welcome to another episode of Small Change. Today I'm joined by Linda MacDonald and Jeanne Sarson. They're the creators of Persons Against Non-State Torture. They're also the authors of the book Women Unsilenced, Our Refusal to Let Torture Traffickers Win. I'm so excited today to introduce Small Change listeners to their work in the field of non-state torture, as well as their work around anger. So welcome to Small Change, Linda and Jeanne.
Thanks, Doreen.
Could you tell listeners what non-state torture is and how you became aware of its existence?
Okay, so our definition of non-state torture has evolved over many years. We coined the term non-state torture. So non-state torture is torture that is committed by non-state actors in public or in private, in relationships, perpetrated within families, in human trafficking, in prostitution, in pornographic exploitation by violent groups and gangs, dismissed as social, cultural, traditional, or religious acts and norms, and can be committed during migration, displacement, in humanitarian and civil unrest. So that's quite a mouthful. And I'll give you what a non-state actor is, because that's what non-state torture, perpetrators are non-state actors. It's any individual or entity not acting under the lawful authority of the state. And that was by the UN Security Council in 2004. And I'll let Jeanne tell you how we got involved in it.
Well, we got involved in the issue of non-state torture victimization by a woman who called and asked for support. And when we met with her, very quickly, she started telling us she had been tortured, born into a family that tortured and trafficked her. Her trafficking began when she was 2 years old. She said her parents used to set her on the counter of her parents' store, and she was sold like a bag of potatoes. And she can remember her father saying, "Bring her back when you're done." So that means it's a constant recycling of a human being. In this case, it was a little girl, but adult women also are perpetrated in the same way.
Your work as public health nurses, as well as with women who have experienced non-state torture, that led you to look at anger, and anger through a feminist lens. And that made you realize that women and girls are indoctrinated to suppress their anger. Why does society tell girls and women to suppress their anger? And how does it ensure that they bury that anger rather than acknowledging it and addressing the root causes of it?
Well, I must say, my work on non-state torture wasn't what brought me to examine anger. I already had understood anger, and I think that was important before I started working with Sarah. So I always knew I was angry. I've been angry since I can remember. I didn't always know I was angry at myself. I only learned that when I met Jeanne. But I always knew I was angry. And the reason why I always knew I was angry was because my father was very violent. And I knew that was wrong. I knew his violence was wrong. And I was angry with him for being violent. And I kept trying to get him to stop in any way I could. And he never did. So I just grew up angry. And of course, I think anyone who's aware of patriarchy, any woman especially, or girl, and men should be angry as well, but they aren't always, and not all women are either. We should all be angry at patriarchy, because anger is a sign of a violation of your boundaries or an injustice. And patriarchy is a grave injustice. So then to take it into helping women who endured non-state torture, of course, they were terrified of their anger because of how much anger had been inflicted onto them in brutality and torture. And patriarchy tells girls and women that we're wrong if we're angry. There's nothing worse than an angry woman. We're disregarded. We're considered mentally ill. We're pathologized. And that's all to keep us silent. Because if we resist patriarchy has to change. And our voice is powerful. So if you can convince a woman or a girl that her voice is wrong or bad, then you can silence her and keep the patriarchy as it is.
That makes so much sense when you say it that way, Linda. I'd like to know what happens to a brain that's experiencing anger, and how can this anger be processed in a productive way that eventually leads to growth?
Well, for me, it's very, very important that we become emotionally aware of being able to name an emotional response. Like if you're in a situation and you have a gut response and it feels uncomfortable, what is the name of that emotion? Why are you feeling uncomfortable? And really, you can go back to a little 2-year-old, and if they have freedom to respond truthfully, I've heard little 2-year-olds say, no, 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 many, many times. That's a boundary. And if you violate that, you can even see a little 2-year-old get angry. And it's important for parents that they start identifying that then. Because what Linda and I are learning is that even the women we support, they have to work hard to start understanding, number one, that their boundaries are being violated and have been violated criminally and relationally. And number two, to start learning the physical sensation of their anger and being able to name it. Am I angry? Am I upset? Am I hurt? And often anger is hidden as hurt. People don't go further into understanding, I'm hurting now, but why am I hurting? I'm hurting because somebody has just violated my boundaries. I have said no and they didn't listen, and they just kept doing what they were doing. So yeah, I'm pissed off, and actually a little bit of swearing now and then we've learned is healthy, because when our boundaries are broken and somebody is not listening, when you're trying to tell them, no, that's enough, we can get pissed off and we can get angry, and know that's okay, because what you're doing, you're telling the other person, I am a person and I want you to listen to what I'm saying and hear me and respond to what I'm asking you to do. To stay away, or don't touch me, or even like I had a little visit with my great granddaughter, and my son said, do you want to give her a kiss? And she said no. And so we say that's fine, and we don't push it. And it's the same with adult women. I don't want you to touch me. That's a simple statement of a boundary. So that's one way we can do, is to learn to name our emotion, to learn to understand the physical sensations that emotions create. That's personal awareness. And for some people, it's quite difficult. It takes a time to learn if you've not grown up understanding with and being able to name how you're feeling emotionally.
And our brain processes our emotions. So if you have something happen that makes you angry, and you, as a child especially, because you learn these patterns, so our amygdala, where our emotions are stored, if we feel the anger, then we release chemicals, and those chemicals go throughout our body. They can make our heart rate go up, or our blood pressure go up, all kinds of different things. And we learn over time, our front brain learns to self-regulate that anger. But if we're not given the freedom to feel and to name our emotions, like little Jeanne's little great-granddaughter, of course, then we just start stuffing them. if we're shamed or if we're beaten or whatever happens to us, tortured, then we just keep those emotions trapped in our brain. And then we get sick. Our bodies respond with all kinds of autoimmune responses, stomach disorders, arthritis, post-traumatic stress disorders, not disorders, but responses such as chronic fatigue. All kinds of different things happen to us. And it's not a coincidence that because women are denied the freedom to express our anger, and that we have, as a sex, we have a higher incidence of immune responses or symptoms. And so it's really important for our well-being to trust our anger and to express our anger, and not to buy into this that, oh, you're just an angry woman always complaining, or that anger is a negative emotion. We've been told that so much. Emotions do not have a value on them. They just are. It's how we respond to our emotions and how society responds to our emotions that are negative or positive. So if someone tells me I'm angry, that's just a fact to me, and I have a right to my anger. And if someone wants to say that I'm wrong for being angry, that's their opinion. But I know that I have a right to my anger.
Linda, so many of the examples that you gave, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, those are often poo-pooed by medical doctors as being psychological issues or mental health issues. How does that play into all of this?
Well, it's another way to make us think we're crazy, right? That women are crazy. How much women are pathologized, and little girls and women are, it's just, that's why patriarchy is so dangerous, because it's set up to keep women and girls feeling wrong, that we're just wrong as little persons or adult women. And that's when you get internalized anger. And that's what I didn't realize I was doing, was, even though I was angry at lots of things, I didn't have the opportunity to talk about my emotions anywhere, especially back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so people weren't talking about their emotions back then very much. So, you get a spillover of your anger, and you can subject yourself to your own self-anger, and that's very destructive. So I had to unlearn that pattern. As Jeanne said to me, I always knew I was angry. So she said, well, who are you angry with? Well, I knew I was angry at my father, and I knew I was angry. She said, who else are you angry with? And then it just hit me like a thunderbolt. I'm angry with myself. And that was an awakening for me, because I had no idea of how much anger I had internalized.
Can I just expand a little bit? And this is in relation to the women that Linda and I have supported. They have massive anger, actually rage. It goes beyond kind of boundary violation of anger. They have rage, and their rage is complex because of the torture and the dehumanization that the victimization created. The victimization is so powerful that women do not even sometimes know they're human beings. And I just wanted to share about the healability when you talked about different responses that women could have, like chronic fatigue. This is a response a woman can have depending on the degree of victimization inflicted against her. And in this case, I'm talking about torture. It is so extreme that a woman can not know she's human, but her perception is such that she may not even perceive that she has a physical body or even skin. And that kind of perception happens in our brain, and it happens at the back of our head and the occipital lobe. That in surviving, it is an amazing response that our brain can keep us safe by altering our perception, that we don't know that we have a body. We don't know that we have a body that's being hurt. But the very amazing thing is that in the right environment, with the right care, this starts changing. We have watched as women start healing. They have healability with the right care. They start healing. And little by little, they start coming back into their body. They start understanding they have skin, that they have a physical body, and they're a human being with rights to say no. That's extremely powerful. We have the extreme in survival that we can disassociate and become non-visible to ourselves. And in the healing, we want to heal that, because that's is not going to help us when we're healed. For example, you may not wear a winter coat because you think you've been told that you don't deserve to have a winter coat. So you go around freezing cold, but because you're disassociated, you're not really paying attention to how uncomfortable you are. So that's a survival response, and that's amazing. On the other side, that survival response becomes a negative that can subject you to harming yourself if you don't dress warmly. So how our brain heals from emotion, from victimization, because boundary anger usually comes from some kind of violation. It depends on the continuum, whether it's a verbal insult, whether it's a put down, whether it's just calling you all kinds of names. This makes a difference. So it's very important that we understand healability. And I think this is just watching the women that we have supported heal, that if we don't deliver the right kind of care, that the body takes on, like Linda said, things like chronic fatigue, because maybe they've just not had the right care. Nobody's asking them the right questions, that they become aware of themselves and how they're feeling. I just want to add that there, because I'm very concerned, like Linda mentioned, patriarchy. The systems have not granted women the right to be a person, if you will. It goes to that extent, in the fact that if you're a female person, you're not seen equal to a male person. So we don't go to the middle, that we're all human beings, but we're different, but we're still equal. And I don't think the healthcare system pays enough attention to how they deliver the care, emotional care.
If there's someone listening today that recognizes that she has been repressing her anger, what first steps could she take to begin to remedy the situation? And if there's any resources that you want to add in, please feel free.
Well, like Jeanne said, of course, if she's recognizing it, she's naming it. That's the first thing we always have to do. Awareness is crucial in any emotion that we're feeling. And it's really crucial in anger, because it's so dismissed and disregarded and discouraged for women. So once you name your anger, then you have to figure out a way to deal with it. Heal if you've had suppressed anger, and learn a healthy way to express it. So there's a fine balance in how one lives with anger. I'm always angry. I think it's just a fact of life if you're an activist and you're aware. But that's not the only feeling I have. I have joy and sadness and hope, and you can have multitude of feelings all at one time. But you just have to accept that you have anger. Start figuring out what's causing your anger. What are the root causes of it? Is it hurt that someone's harmed you personally? Is it social, in the injustice that you're feeling, maybe at work or in general society, about the discrimination of women? Start clarifying that anger. You can do that in writing and find someone to talk to about it. It's often very difficult to process your anger without talking to someone else, whether it's a friend, someone you trust. But make sure you don't pathologize yourself. Make sure you don't start thinking that there's something wrong with you, that you have a mental illness because you have anger. That's really harmful. So don't do that. And read about anger, like I talked about The Dance of Anger, a book that was written in 1986 and it's still selling today by Harriet Gerder Lerner. It's a good basic book about anger. Read about anger, and there's lots of things written about anger. And don't get stuck in anger, because once you start clarifying your anger, you can get into ranting about anger, and that's not going to help either. You know, you have to kind of find a middle ground of balance so that you're not stuck in it and fixated on everything. You have to find balance and find thankfulness. It's a gift when you have awareness. So to be thankful that you have the gift, and try to find a way to live with your anger and help it mobilize you to do something in your life, to change whatever is making you angry, to change your relationships, to speak up, use your voice differently, or leave a relationship, or change a job, or get a new form of activism. Whatever can help you to live with your anger and feel that you're moving forward with it.
I put in a little link to a YouTube video that Linda and I did about learning about our relationship with oneself. That might be a resource. It's a short video. It's not a long video. So people may want to look at it and think about it. It was one that I developed and even used it with children, and children learned very quickly about their relationship with themselves. And one of the interventions is to pay attention to what you're thinking, not only what you're thinking, but whose voice you're listening to, whether you're listening to your own voice or listening to what the other person is saying. Like they could tell you, well, no, you're not angry. Maybe you're saying to yourself, I am angry, you know, is to identify for yourself whose voice you're listening to, because it's about your emotion and the situation that you're in and having that emotion.
And you can buy our book, because in Women on Silence, we talk about anger in our book too. It's in the index and in our book, because we're talking about women who were subjected to non-state torture, but there's much theory in the book, feminist theory, that any woman can read and appreciate, that you don't have to be tortured to learn in our book. So that's another suggestion I have.
So at this point, I have to say, when I write about your advocacy for non-state torture, I get angry. And I get angry at the fact that the Canadian government has refused to include non-state torture in the Criminal Code of Canada, and they've had multiple chances. Can you explain to listeners why this is happening, and also explain to them why you're now focused on taking your advocacy to the United Nations?
Well, as far as the Canadian government goes, I know we talk about democracy, but for me, it starts there. It's a patriarchal democracy. Until, as human beings, we're equal as human beings, it's still a patriarchal democracy, because women are still having to work to find an equal place in the system of patriarchy. So we have to transform patriarchy from a male superiority and female inferiority perspective. And I don't see any other way. I don't mean throwing it out. We have to transform it to a position of equality, that it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you're still a person and you're equal in that process as a person. Often what I hear from women sometimes say, well, I don't want to be equal to men, but that's not the issue. It's not being equal to men. It's that men and women come together to be equal as persons. So I think what has happened with patriarchy, to get back to your question in more detail is that patriarchy has set us up to not be equal. And what has happened, and this, I get angry, I'm like Linda, I get angry, but my anger is focused so I don't get hurt with it. But the fact that the way human rights were shaped, especially the Convention Against Torture, the Convention Against Torture was made and only applied to men initially. So our country signed the convention, ratified the convention, and took it into Canadian law. So the Canadian law says you can only claim you were tortured if the torturer was a government employee, a policeman or an official, public official of some kind. So immediately that discrimination is encountered at the federal level. And every time we go there, this is what they tell us. Well, the convention says the only person that can subject you to torture is an official. And they don't want to hear about the parent or the spouse or the neighbor. That's a constant. They just dismiss it. Doesn't matter if we get support from the UN, they come back and say, listen, we don't have to listen. So we don't do it. So the discrimination, the patriarchal discrimination in Canada at the federal level around torture is very strong. So Linda, you may want to take the international question.
Well, it's the same internationally because we're stuck in patriarchy, whether it's in Canada or globally. And of course, the UN is patriarchal too, because the Committee Against Torture is patriarchal and says that it only applies to men and warring men, or sometimes women in prison, but never women in the home or women and girls in human trafficking. It's all that discrimination. It's really maddening. So, what's been a lifesaver is to understand patriarchy so that I don't go crazy. It's just the opposite. Anger keeps me from going crazy because I understand why it's happening. And I know it's not me. I know I'm not seeing things wrong. I understand why the people in power are doing what they're doing, but it doesn't stop me from talking. So don't give up, don't shut up and just keep going. Don't deny yourself your anger, be proud of it. And just keep persevering at whatever your goal is, because we're not giving up and we're gaining more and more momentum now. There's many more lawyers globally that are agreeing with what we're saying. And we have a working paper now on non-state torture from an NGO. So it's, it's taken us 30 years to get this far. You have to be true to yourself, keep your dreams, be persistent, and eventually something has to give. And because otherwise, if you silence yourself, you're only going to walk away from who you are and lose yourself. And that's another tragedy. So we have a right to our voice and we have a right to anger. And don't let people tell you it's a negative emotion.
Jeanne and Linda, thank you for speaking to me today about the role that anger plays in women's lives and how important it is in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you, Doreen. Hopefully you'll help people that are listening.
Have a wonderful angry day.